Make an extra line steak.
JJ,
Yeah.
I'm running a meeting, so do me a favor and try to keep it down.
Hi, Jason. It looks like we have quorum.
Excellent. Oh, you guys heard all that. Sorry. I was unmuted. We have the little ones, you know, that's our modern world today. So I'm ready to start the meeting. Thank you, Carly. Would you, before we adopt the agenda?
Sure. Okay. So until further notice, all meetings of Manhattan Community Board 11 will be conducted by video conference. Links to register to attend the video conferences for each of our committee meetings will be published on the meeting's calendar on our website. To avoid crosstalk and help the meeting run effectively, panelists and attendees are asked to keep their microphones on mute when they're not speaking. It's also helpful to utilize headphones. Those participating by phone can dial *6 to unmute. If you wish to share a question or a comment, you may do so by utilizing the raise hands function. I will be monitoring to ensure that your hands are recognized. I memorized this by now. Those participating by phone can dial *9 to raise your hand, and committee members will be called on first and then attendees. Please keep your questions or comments brief.
Thank you, Carly. Much appreciated. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. We'll go straight into the attendance. Can you roll call it, Carly, please?
Yes. Arroyo?
Here.
Brooks?
Present.
Goldblum? Green?
Here.
Malave? Giselle, I think you're here.
I'm sorry. I'm here, Carly.
Meyer?
Here.
Padilla? Santiago?
Here.
Villanueva?
Present.
And Wu. Okay, we have quorum.
Excellent. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second, that's John Green.
Second, Rakeem.
Thank you, Rakeem. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We have we can proceed. Thank you so much, Carly, for the presentation with the slideshow. So yeah, everyone's received the agenda. Pretty much this is an effort and conversations that we had from our postmortem of what happened this year with our submission of the district needs and us wanting to further understand the process with our elected officials. Last month, we discussed 3 core issues, which was engagement, education, and refinement. And this is going to tailor to that education portion with the research and development of us figuring out more collaborative ways to cohesively work with our elected officials and assisting in the district needs and budget requests process. So first and foremost, I would love to thank the Manhattan Borough President's Office Budget Director Vanessa Lopez for attending and presenting in our meeting, as well as our district council member Diana Ayala. Thank you so much to the 2 of you for taking your time out tonight and further educating us so that way we can collaborate more efficiently with times to come. So from this point, if there's any questions, concerns, I would like to move to the presentations. I don't see any hands raised. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Carly so she can introduce the MPP's office.
Okay, great. So as Jason mentioned, we have Vanessa Diaz-Lopez here, as well as Councilwoman Diana Ayala here to discuss the budget process. And Vanessa, I believe, do you want to share your screen?
Oh, great. Can I?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you. Share. And then I am not such an expert. You guys have been doing this for so long. You can do it in your sleep.
Yeah, I can help you. You got it.
So, I mean, thank you for having me. Thank you for the interest. I think it's extremely important for every individual who lives in the city of New York or in any country, quite frankly, to understand how their government works and how the budget in their government works and how that's negotiated, what it means, and what roles you can play, including the role of advocating on behalf of the needs of your community for those who you elected to office in the case of democracies, right? This is a presentation that has been used in the past. As you know, the Manhattan Borough President has a board leadership series. It's likely we won't go through every single slide because we also want to make sure that the Councilwoman is able to speak and we can have questions and a discussion. So I'll try to do my best. I know in this committee, it's likely that there are different levels of knowledge already on what the budget is and how it happens in the roles of the different parts. I hope that I can fill in some of the other, if there are any gaps, and if not, then ask questions and I will address those. So you do already know that the budget is cyclical and every year there is a process to go ahead and start that the negotiation of what the city budget, right? So a cycle, it is ongoing. Sometimes people talk about the budget as if it's like budget season. Really, budget season is all year round. Budget negotiations do happen during this January, more so February to June. So we'll talk a little bit about what the city budget process is, what the role of our office is. We'll tell you a little bit in the principle of transparency. We'll also tell you a little bit more about the types of funding that we have in our office. I should mention that we did have our information sessions already on Tuesday and Thursday, and we will be forwarding those recordings and materials to the community board so that they can be distributed for, in any way that you want. Is public information, but certainly for you to have it as a committee. And then we'll talk a little bit about the role of the board and any questions that you may have. So the city budget has multiple components. One is the expense budget, and that's how you pay my salary and the salaries of everybody who works for the city of New York. There's the contract budget that is a subset of that expense budget, and it includes contractual services. I have a beautiful accent, so if you don't understand me saying a word, read it in the slide. Then there's the revenue budget, and this is how the city kind of determines on an annual basis how much money they're going to take in for all of those fines that they give, all of those state and federal grants, and all the taxes that they, collect from us. And then the financial plan there's 4 of them, and it's basically the ongoing process, the cyclical process that happened in the city to look at the revenue and, how much are we spending and how much is coming in, basically. And so there's a constant process of balancing the budget. And those have different names. There's a September plan, there's a November plan, and we can certainly go into more detail at another session if that's something you would like from our office. And then there's the capital plan, which is that the plan that includes a long-term plan on how we're going to be handling infrastructure. So water main, tunnels, streets, building schools, maintaining city-owned buildings, that sort of thing. So there is a lot of eligibility criteria when it comes to capital budget, and I am focusing a little bit more on that because it's a little bit more of the role that we have in the Borough President's office. While we do get to comment on expense budget and we do get to respond to the budget that the mayor puts forth, we don't really get to negotiate the budget. And we'll get to that a little bit more. So, but we do get to allocate capital funding. And so this slide is very short. It can be complemented by the presentation that we'll send to you later tomorrow. So, you know, for you to keep in mind when you're thinking about like, well, we need more shelters, or we need more housing, or we need to fix the MTA tunnel, or all of those different types of things. Some of those are capital, but they're not necessarily capital. The money that it takes to build those, it's money that has to be put forth by the administration rather than an elected official with their discretionary funding, because the amount that elected officials get is much smaller than the cost of getting all of those things done, which is why it's so important to collaborate with all the different levels of government to help and push forth what your district needs are, and we should spend a lot of time putting together. So the capital funding comes from selling bonds. The minimum of a capital project, the minimum has to be $50,000. That's if it's not a real property. Let's say that you guys are thinking we need to have a community center, and that has to be at least $500,000 for the city to be willing to entertain that process of entering into any agreements to build this facility. And so that's that part there. And so there's other types of capital funding. Let's say that you are a nonprofit theater, or, you know, and you need to buy lights, or you need something for your stage, or you just need to put a new HVAC system. That is also something that is that can be, you can ask for, the nonprofits can ask for, and it's eligible as well. But all of these require that those nonprofits or those organizations have a history of having contracts with the city of New York. So if you're a startup, for example, and you're just, you know, you're a volunteer-based organization and so on, you're not eligible to apply for capital funding. And again, if we wanted to have a conversation more carefully around that, and I can suggest, for example, looking at your district needs and some of the things that you're mentioning and how maybe capital funding applies or doesn't apply, or expense, I'm more than willing to do that. But I think it's better to discuss it with examples in mind, if that makes sense to people. So what does $10 million buy you? And this is information that's provided by the Independent Business Office. So, I mean, everything is extremely expensive. There's just so many contracts and so many laws that are attached to how the city can spend money. The fact that you have to bid and go into contracts, and a series of regulations that have been put in place to protect people who are doing this work, you know, so people who are, you know, whether we get people who are unionized, right, to get these jobs and so on. And the price of doing work with unions is more than, you know, than other. So this gives you a sense of how expensive things are, you know, like recycling trucks, $29 million. You know, you can buy seven ladder fire trucks, etc., interactive boards. So this is what $10 million gives you, which, as you can tell, is not a lot, right? I mean, it's not a lot compared to the need that is present. And then there goes the question as to where do these things go once they are purchased? Do they go to where they need to go, and so on? So how do you advocate for that? So I just wanted to give you a little tiny example of what a capital project looks like. This one is in the Lower East Side, but I have one in your Community Board 11. If you give me just 1 second. This was a playground in a school. This is what they had. And I have to tell you, at least they have that equipment there, right? But this is pretty much all they had. And this is right across from NYCHA at Campos Plaza, right across. So we enter into an agreement with the Trust for Public Land. And we said, can you come and create a park here that then will be open to the general public and not just for the kids in the school during school time? So now they put part of the funding, we put part of the funding, the borough president put part of the, sorry, I was in the council then, so I'm getting a little confused. The then council person, the borough president put money, and the Trust for Public Land gets money. They fundraise themselves to be able to do the work, and this is how it came out. So this is now open to the public. It's right across from NYCHA, which has a big, big need. Obviously, we know this. And their playground at Campos Plaza had not been repaired for many years. Now it was repaired, but quite frankly, the work that I prefer this one. I'm not a child, but I prefer this one. So there's that one, but I want to show you quickly. This is PS 133. I don't know how to do this. Okay. I do want you to see this 1 second. This is trying to be, how do I apologize. This right here. This is PS 133. And this school had a yard that was closed for about 5 years. That structure that you see there is made out of wood. The planks were all over the place. There were nails all over the place. And I just could not believe, I could not believe the state of this particular yard. And the not surprising part is that it is not the only school that has a situation like this. So I don't have to keep, sharing this. Let me just stop this part because it's a minute. So if I do this, I'm doing something. Okay, guys, I'm new to this. So give me some, how do I stop it?
So right now we're not seeing your screen.
I paused, you're not.
Oh, now we're seeing your screen.
Okay, here, stop. And now, do you see my screen still or not?
Yes.
Yes, we see the video. I'm not sure if that's what you want us to be seeing.
Stop sharing. And now we're here. Okay, so, you see this, how do I go back? Anyway, you see that blue fence? It used to be a link fence. So now you have an iron fence. They added all of these benches. They added this, I don't know what they're called, but this thing to play in. And so obviously now it's open. So, and the one other thing I wanted to say about this particular one is that it took a very big effort to try to get this done. We, I have to tell you, you guys should really reach out to Nasda, the principal there. She's a champion. She found us. She wouldn't let us go anywhere. And then we put her together with Councilmember Perkins. We reached out to Councilmember Perkins. We introduced her to Councilmember Perkins, and then we were able to get funding together. So you should know that we communicate with all the council members to discuss projects that come on our way so that we can try to share those. So that's just one example. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of fighting because everything takes fighting apparently when you're trying to advocate. So very quickly, the budget, the roles, there are for the city budget. The two players here are mainly the mayor, who puts together the preliminary budget. He determines the non-property taxes and puts a forecast there. Then they put together at the beginning of January a preliminary budget with all the proposals on what the city agencies should be spending, not spending, etc. And then later on, as negotiations happen with the city council, there is an executive budget process, which is also negotiated, and ultimately the budget adoption. And the city agency that is on the arm of the mayor's office is the Office of Management and Budget. They do all the analysis and so on. The city council does have a city council finance unit that then reviews all of those documents. The city of New York, as I mentioned, they review with their battery, with all of the battalion of finance analysts who do a really good job. They go back and forth. They look at what is being proposed. They look at whether it's realistic or not. Does it meet the level of need and care that is needed, and so on. And then they have to make proposals. And that's part of the budget hearing process, where those commissioners and those agencies have to come and report and explain why they've made certain decisions and allocated certain budget lines in there. And I mean, and I don't want to say anything else about the council because the councilwoman is here, so she can speak a little bit more to that. The borough precedents, all we get to do is comment, recommend, and allocate funding. So we get to comment on the mayor's preliminary budget. We get to submit a borough board budget priority report, and we get to recommend modifications. But if we recommend a modification, we have to find out, we have to say like, okay, so we want you allocated 100 million towards housing, but we really think that you should be allocating 250 million. We have to find somewhere in the budget where we're saying, take it out of here and put it here. And that is not an easy thing to do. But that is what we get to do. So when we do decide to engage in making recommendations, we have to be very sure that we're looking at the absolute priorities and that we know exactly what we're doing policy-wise when you're deciding to take money from one place and adding it somewhere else. Of course, it's only a recommendation. Then we also get to do the same with the executive budget. And lastly, we get to allocate capital funding. And so for that process of how we allocate capital funding, I have a separate presentation that I can forward to all of you. It will, and if you do want me to come back and speak about that, I'm more than willing to do that. Let's see. So then there's the borough board, right? The borough board, you know who sits in the borough board. Your committee, your chair sits there, the council members from the Manhattan delegation, and the borough president. And so basically we take all of the work that you have done, right? All of those district needs that you have compilated and you did priorities and so on. We take that, we review the preliminary and executive budget, and we as a whole should be holding a hearing from the borough board to then determine how we want to respond to the preliminary budget. So that's one of the things that we do. So we review, like as I mentioned, we submit that report. Let's see, what else do I need to say here? So this is just pretty much telling you that it's something that we can do and the charter asks us to do to respond to the budget priorities. We can choose not to, right? Because it's only a recommendation, but we want to be responsive. And by the way, if Community Board 11 would like us to have a conversation to go through your district needs so that we can review them carefully and see where you may want us to advocate in our budget response, we are available, we'll make ourselves available to have that conversation. And I would say that you should be making sure that all your elected officials have those, even those elected officials that are state, they should know where you're standing and I don't know what role they have or can have in advocating. I mean, everybody has a different way of going about that if they're not in a budget negotiation team, for example. So you should make sure that they get it and potentially discuss it with them if that's a possibility. So these are the documents that we have told community boards you could use as you're preparing your district needs. The expense budget, because it tells you how much is being allocated to a city agency. The capital budget, because it tells you how much money for infrastructure, parks, roads, sidewalks, community centers, NYCHA, etc. It's available or has been proposed. The register for the community board, the register is the compilation of what all the community boards have put together. It has all of those answers, beautiful answers from the city agencies telling you to reach out to us for money, which I can understand how that can be so frustrating. and then the financial plan. And so all of those are available under the Office of Management and Budget website. And, you know, they're not easy to read necessarily. And if you ever want us to go through it with you, at least let's say that there is a particular district need that you want to focus on. Again, I think we should use examples or scenarios to then go back and look at any of these documents if that's of interest. Okay, this just tells you all the city budget publications that you could use to look and understand at the budget. Again, the New York City Independent Budget Office does a really good job at being nonpartisan, and it's like no nonsense kind of thing, no political stuff. It's like, hey, the mayor said he was going to build 250 housing units, but in the budget there is like $1 for that. You know, like that's the kind of conversation that you can get, kind of information that you can get from there. And so you're going to get this presentation, so don't worry about if you don't see the whole thing here. Okay, again, in the interest of transparency, we have two types of funding that we can provide to organizations, and one of them is capital funding. And capital funding is currently is our school's application is open. It doesn't say it here. Our school's application is open. It's in our grants portal. And again, you'll get that in our other presentation that I'll forward. Our city application is open, and city is anything like NYCHA, parks, community centers, that sort of city-owned facilities that you may want to see restored. And then we have the nonprofit application, which is for nonprofits that are looking for vehicles, looking to acquire buildings, build community centers, and a host of other projects. If you want to see the types of stuff that we fund, please go to our website under our funding tab. We have all of our allocations since the time that Gail has been in office, and you should know also that it is available in the open data portal as mandated by law. And then the Manhattan Community Award Program is an expense program. You might know that the city council members have what is called discretionary expense funding. There's a whole process for applying for that. We get our money in July after budget adoption. So people get a little confused there. For city council, you apply in December, January when they open. And then for us, you apply in July. You should know that these are all reimbursement-based grants. So in essence, it means you have to be a 501c3, and you also need to have the money up front and then get reimbursed, which is very problematic for a number of organizations, yet this is what exists at this time. We don't have any other funding sources. We are looking to create more relationships with foundations. Many people reach out to us to figure out, how can I find money for this? How can I find money for that? And I have to tell you that the bureaucracy of working with government takes most of our time in making sure that projects that we do fund get forward, move forward. And so creating those other relationships has been quite difficult, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't reach out to us so that we can try to figure out how to help if we can. And that's it. I hope I didn't talk too much. If anybody has questions, I'm here to answer. Or I should stop sharing. There.
Sorry. Thank you, Vanessa. That was an outstanding presentation. It was very informative and practically speaking. I see we have a question for Stephanie. Stephanie, would you like to go?
Yeah, just quick question. Thank you so much for the presentation. That was very informative. But I wasn't sure if maybe I missed it. How much does the Manhattan Borough President have in capital funding, and how much does she have in expense?
So in expense funding, we used to have more money. The money, let me add a little bit more to expense to that question. the money that we have in expense is really money that is allocated to city agencies that we then get to put applications out and then ask that those city agencies enter into contracts with those nonprofits that got the money. Right now, we can contract with the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and I'm missing someone, Department of Correction. So we used to have about $650,000. Now we have 330. The larger part of that funding was DFTA funding, Department for the Aging, and that was cut during the last budget negotiations. That's money that comes from the council, and we don't have that money anymore. So that's how much we have. For the capital funding, it varies. There is a formula that I cannot explain, but is related to the amount of land that we have and how much funding income is coming into the city. I will find the answer so I can answer it correctly. But the bottom line is it changes every year. It has a lot to do with how much, if we've been able to collect taxes, not collect taxes, and so on. And it's related to that revenue forecast that is put forth by he's not a governor, he's a mayor, by the mayor. So I'll tell you this about this. And so the other part is that it may change between the preliminary budget and the executive budget. In budget negotiations, it may change so that we can lose money or we can gain more money. One year we got $25 million more by executive budget. The next year we were cut all the way to 9 million. So this year we have been already told by OMB it was going to be a really hard year. And it's likely that you guys are going to get very little money. And in my brain, very little money so that I can feel better is the least that we ever got was $9 million. So I'm telling everybody, we have very limited money. Focus on your absolute priority. It is Gail's last budget. She's term limited. So this is it when it comes to us being able to put discretionary funding.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Do we have any other questions, Carly?
Seeing any hands raised right now?
Okay. So yeah, thank you so much, Vanessa, for the presentation. We definitely would love for you to come back, in particular to assist us in our responses this fiscal cycle, because we know it's challenging, both with the administration and public health with COVID. So again, thank you so much for coming out tonight, and I'll turn it over to Carly for the council member.
Yeah, real quick though, I personally had a question, and I'm not sure if it's something you can speak to, Vanessa. I'm just curious. So during the presentation, you showed us the playground that was rebuilt with rebuilt by Trust for Trust. Yeah, okay. I guess I'm curious, what goes into the decision-making process? Like what are the benefits of working with that trust rather than putting that funding into Parks Department? I know that there is an issue in the Parks Department, specifically with procurement. So I'm not sure if that has something to do with it, but I'm just curious what goes into that decision.
Yeah, so it is, you hit on it, the benefit of, first of all, the Trust for Public Land will not necessarily build in any given, property. They have to, there's certain things that they're trying to do for the climate, and it has to meet certain criteria, because they get money from city agencies that are trying to improve, the water runoff and that sort of thing, right? So the benefit of working with them in this case is that they do their own fundraising, right? So it's not just us putting money and then potentially asking the council person to put money, or the state person, any of the state people. They themselves fundraise, private money. Plus, they also do go to the other elected officials and all the different levels to try to get money to do that. It is cheaper because of the procurement issue that you just mentioned. And the product is way beyond what we could have envisioned, because oh, by the way, if it's a playground in a school, right? They have a curriculum. They go and they work with the students to do visioning sessions. It becomes a part of the class. So they learn engineering, all the different things, skills, of course, at the level that these kids could learn. So it's an engagement process that wouldn't happen, period, with Parks. Parks does some visioning sessions, but not at this level, right? So we feel that it's ownership, community ownership. The children are learning skills that they wouldn't have at a very, very early age, that they wouldn't have had potentially in any other way, especially the communities that have been chosen don't necessarily have this kind of curriculum in their schools. So yeah, cheaper, better product, faster, and more money.
Yeah, thank you. I imagined it was something like that, but I just wanted confirmation. And then I think my last question is something like a question I think would benefit the committee to, hear a little bit about. So how would you, forgive me if you touched on this before and I missed it, but how would you say the borough president determines what her funding priorities are?
Yes. Great question. Now I know when people say great question, they're catching some time to be able to answer the question. I work for an elected official that is very active everywhere, very much loved by many people. She wants to give money to everybody. She wants to make sure that every project gets some money. And it's quite challenging at times to be able to work on how do we make this happen. So I'm going to answer the question this way, and then hopefully I will be as concrete as I can. We work to give as much information out to everyone who wants to have it so that they know how to ask for funding, what's eligible. We have meetings with people, we have phone calls with people. We discuss projects with people that are not eligible, and we help them make them eligible in the process. So I think what we're really good at in our office is doing that, being able, we tailor any training and so on. So as transparent as we can be, and here's all the knowledge we have so that we can give it to everybody else and you can have your own knowledge and go forth and do what you need to do. I will say though that Gail's priority, if you have, I don't want to say it's her priority, but if you do look at how she has allocated funding in the past, you'll see that about 50% of the funding goes to schools. We have 250, if not more, schools in Manhattan. It might be higher than that. Don't quote me on that. And she will refuse not to give at least $100,000 to every school that applies. So that has translated in the bulk of the money being towards technology in schools, which has helped somewhat in this time of the year when people needed these. So schools definitely a priority. Support to health and hospitals, parks, CUNY. So everything that it's public, right, that is supporting people for health, for learning, for career advancement, and so on. Youth services. And youth services we've helped with either building acquisitions, building centers for them, or even putting money towards NYCHA so that we can help community centers that are falling apart. She also wants to do a little work with housing, but affordable housing. So we've provided money, nominal amounts of money. We have provided a significant amount for some HDFCs, I think is in East Harlem. I can't recall exactly where, so I apologize if that's not the case. So, that's important to her. And then other than that, we have supported a lot of nonprofit organizations with whether they're doing an initial outfitting of their space, or they need new computers, etc. So it's more likely that when we give funding for projects, we're looking at a subset of their complete project. Let's say that you're a theater and you're renovating the whole space. Well, let's look at the funding for the HVAC system, because we just don't have that much money. So I wouldn't say it's more, it's priorities, it's more of what's coming in. How do we make all of those eligible so that we can give something to them? But if you do look at what we have allocated, then you'll see that that is what the pattern: schools, culturals, NYCHA, somewhat, CUNY, H&H, parks, and then everybody else. So that's how I can answer that question.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think that was a very informative answer. I'm still writing on the pad. I really appreciate it. In the interest of time, I would like to move it along if there's no more other concerns. So again, thank you, Vanessa. And I would like to turn it for Carly so that we can introduce our council member who's been so patiently waiting. Thank you all.
Okay. So yes, Councilmember Diana Ayala is on the line. Hi, Councilwoman.
Hi. I'm a fan of Vanessa, so I could sit here all day just listening to her. And that was a really good presentation. Thank you, Vanessa. So before I even say anything else, I just want to apologize because there is a lot of activity in my household right now. I have threatened everyone, but there may be a sneezing husband, a crying child, or a barking animal somewhere. So yeah, I think Vanessa was very thorough in her description of the budget process. For us, it's the same, yet, different. Obviously, there are two kind of components to the budget as it relates to the city council. One, there's our local discretionary and capital allocation, right? So each council member is allotted a specific amount of money for their discretionary needs in their community. That amounts to $5 million a year in capital dollars. And then we get $400,000 in overall discretionary funds that we can use for pretty much anything. We get $110,000 in for senior services and programs, 180 to supplement youth programs and services, and then we get an additional 100 that used to not exist, and actually Melissa Margarito created this pot, and it's an anti-poverty pot that's based so we got 100,000, which is the maximum that any council member councilmatic office can get, but it's really based on need and the level of poverty that exists per district. So some members maybe get significantly less, but we get the bulk of it. So every year through that process, now in December you should start. We actually looked today, and there isn't a date yet, which is a little bit odd for the capital application to be to go online. So it'll usually go online in December, and then the discretionary goes online in January. Discretionary is only online for about 6 weeks. Capital's on a little bit longer, but usually by March, we're sitting down internally looking at what our priorities are. In terms of the capital funding, those priorities also include priorities that we split with the borough president's office. In my case, I have two borough presidents that I work with, the Bronx borough president and the Manhattan borough president. So we'll sit down and we'll look at usually her list or his list, because they get their capital requests a lot sooner than we do. And then we'll prioritize projects that are in the district that maybe we were also interested in funding. And that's pretty simple process. And as Vanessa described, a lot of that money usually tends to go to schools for technology upgrades, new libraries, equipment. And then the discretionary, we start to meet with folks, as I said, around March, and we spent a good portion of the month just meeting with local groups. I try to make it as easy as possible. And if I've met with a group in the past, I can't, obviously I can't meet with every group every single year because there are hundreds of applicants. We actually got, I think it was a little roughly over 1,200 applications last fiscal year. So, it's that's a lot of groups to meet with. So we try to prioritize and to keep some sort of, consistency in terms of who's been funded before and organizations that have, been around for a really long time. I think one of our issues has always been that we have more need than we have resources to cover. And even though our funding is really meant to be supplemental in nature, we do need more money if we really want to be able to make a bigger impact in the community. And then there's a separate process that happens within the city council in and of itself. So in February, the mayor will put out his preliminary budget, and then he'll call a meeting of council members and he'll present to us his plan. And then negotiations will begin between the speaker's office and the mayor's office. And that process can last all the way to the end of June. You typically try to come to some sort of consensus by the beginning of June, because by law we have to vote on it by the 30th. But because I am typically council members are not part of that process, but because I am a member of the budget negotiating team, then I participate in that way. Each borough has a delegation, so whatever delegation you're a part of, you do kind of what the community board does, right? Is that you set aside budget priorities that you feel are important for that borough, and you present those to the speaker's office, and then that is presented to the budget negotiating team, and then they kind of heckle it out with the mayor's office and try to figure out what can be funded this year. If it's a really good fiscal climate, then we can add new services. If we're generating more revenue than we did the year before, then we can create programs. Unfortunately, this year was just a really bad year. And we're anticipating that this new fiscal year will be even worse if we don't get some sort of financial package that truly reflects the needs of New York City from the federal government. So we're kind of bracing ourselves. But what does that process look like? So we get to budget negotiating, and then we'll go back, and the mayor's office will say, well, we don't really need to fund on our end. We don't need to fund additional meals, city school meals. And we may create an initiative, or we may have an initiative. And so we'll go back and forth until we come to some sort of middle place before the end of June. And then some of those things, smaller initiative projects and programs are sometimes, it's not uncommon to continue to negotiate them. So we'll negotiate a dollar amount before adoption, and then we'll negotiate the specifics afterwards. So that happens a lot, too. I was actually looking while Vanessa was talking at the district needs report that the community board puts out, and I see that I think that if you're looking to kind of learn how to better negotiate, right, and to better leverage your relationships with the elected officials, so that the district is really benefiting, right, from what the community board perceives as a need that is unmet, then I would, I think that we have a tendency of like overcomplicating this process, right? It's a very simplistic process. I think that your relationship with your elected officials is golden, and I think that you should utilize that and really be able to have frank conversations. But the district needs report is also very generalized, right? So when we're looking at it, there's not a specific ask, and I think that that's also something that that we could work on. So for instance, I'm looking at right now, I think is the DYCD, or it was one for DYCD on Department of Health. I don't remember. There was one on youth violence, right? And so, we also have to remember that we have programs that are coming into the community that are underfunded. So, you want to be very clear and concise on what exactly the ask is for those programs that are local, and more of a priority for you. I think that that's helpful to us, right? When we're reading these reports, if you have a specific ask and it's clear, then I think that you have a better chance of catching the attention of whoever is reading it, just because of the density in the document itself. It just makes it very difficult, because remember, this is coming to us at the same time that we're having and engaging in all of these conversations, when at the same time you know, you have hundreds of institutions and organizations that are also, you know, vying for our time and attention because they want to make sure that they're funded or that they're continue to be funded. But I don't know if I want to stop there because I want to really hear from you guys on what you think that we could do better, or have an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have for me.
Thank you so much, Diana. Councilmember, I really appreciate the presentation. It was very informative. I think I will truly say step one was today. I mean, us being educated and understanding the actual process and what happens behind the scenes will definitely assist us in better collaborating with our local officials. And I know your office has an open door for our community board. So I will now open it up to the membership. I see we have Giselle that has a question.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Council Member Diana. I myself am learning about this city budget process for the first time, and I've slowly been reading about it. So it is a complicated process, but it is simple sometimes when you have people like yourself that kind of chop it down for us. So thank you for that. And then also the numbers that you gave, it was a question in terms of like, is there a report on like current economic conditions that somehow we can look up or see or get a hold of around the time that we can get, because we are waiting for our responses from city agencies. I believe in January we get them. Once we get those responses, if we see maybe perhaps the number that we're working with, considering the conditions of like, you know, this was a bad year, like you said, is there something like that available for us to see? Like, because this year was so crucial, so we know what to prioritize for next year?
There's no localized list, but if you're looking to get a better understanding of where public dollars went, I think that, you know, the city council puts up what we call Schedule C every year. So whatever funding initiatives, you know, we're funding this year will usually go on that document, and it'll also give you a really good description of what the mayoral priorities are, how much money goes into the borough president. I mean, the entire budget is captured on that document, and that document actually becomes available within, you know, I think it's actually a few hours even before before adoption. So, you know, if anything that you need to know is there. But I think, because I've had this conversation, I think like a couple of years ago, we had this conversation about, I think Jason, I think it was you, around the Esplanade, for example, right? So the Esplanade is a very difficult, you know, type of project to fund in nature, only because it's really a multi-million-dollar, you know, job. I don't have multi-million dollars just sitting around in my, you know, locally. The borough president, you know, doesn't have that type of money. So that's a request that, you know, has to go directly to the mayor's office. And so while we are we also negotiate capital budget needs with the mayor, but those are really at his discretion. Like, he decides which projects, you know, he wants to prioritize that year. And sometimes, you know, we have to be really careful. Not like, when I'm sitting on the budget negotiating team, I don't have the discretion, unfortunately, of saying, hey, East Harlem really needs a new Esplanade, right? Like, let's just fund that, because the other members that are sitting on that body are going to want to know, well, how does that benefit us? You know, I find creative ways of articulating how this allows for connectivity throughout the island, right? That we're not privy to right now, so that it does in fact benefit the entire island and all of its constituency. But again, is a very competitive process, because there's not as much money as we would need to adequately fund all of these projects. So that, you know, that becomes a little bit complicated. But in the case of a project like that, if you put it into a district needs assessment, we might not see it. So if it's really important to you, then you need to bring it to our attention, because there are opportunities where that funding mechanism will magically appear, and we'll have an opportunity to kind of, you know, insert it somewhere. So it's always, and we learned this through participatory budgeting, right? When we were doing PB, a lot of people will come up with project ideas that either were not fundable through the capital project process, but the idea of just, bringing it to light and really just, speaking it into existence was the driving force for getting a lot of projects funded.
Thank you so much.
Did you want to add something, Vanessa?
There are some documents that the Office of Management and Budget puts together that does provide information per community board. Jason, I forwarded that to you. It's forwarded to the chairs. We can look at it in more detail at some point. The IBO also, if you want to try to find someone who's speaking about what's happening nationwide and then state and localized, the IBO does a good job at that. It won't say it, like the councilwoman mentioned, it won't say Community Board 11, but it gives you a sense of what's happening financially in that financial climate to address what I think Giselle said earlier. That's, there are a ton of nonprofits that do a lot of analysis of the budget. And if you, I can send a few suggestions.
Please do, please do. I love the conversation. Thank you, everyone. Do we have any other questions? I think that answered Giselle's question, the combination. IBL, Stephanie, I'm sorry. We have.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't, she
Okay.
said, I'm sorry, she said IBL and I wasn't sure what that is.
It was IBO, the
Budget Office. Sorry.
Oh, okay, okay.
Talking in acronyms, I apologize.
Thank you. Okay, I see we have Jason Wu, then Xavier Santiago.
Good evening, and thank you, Councilmember Ayala, for your presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my question is, as I'm kind of listening to both presentations and we're talking about basically like how do we want to prioritize like which projects and what we want funded. We're also talking about kind of the budget revenue issues in the city and how, there's going to be challenges up ahead, just like we saw this past fiscal year. And so in addition to us kind of asserting or making clear the demands that we have or what we want to see funded, I think we also need to have a conversation around what we're willing to cut, because part of the conversation around prioritizing is not just what we want funded, but where we want to reallocate funding. And so given kind of the past year where there have been conversations around budget justice on the state level, but also the defunding the police campaign in New York City, I guess I was wondering if you had any thoughts how you're thinking on that general issue, whether that's shifted since last year, how are you thinking about these questions, given that we know that there's going to be cuts across a number of different programs, and even I think at the last Youth and Education Committee, we had a number of education nonprofits and schools come to us talking about various programs that are getting cut or projected to be cut. And so can you speak a little bit more about where you see the cuts needing to be made, as opposed to, just kind of like what we want? Because we can all talk about what we want, but we're not going to be able to get everything that we want. So where can we cut?
I mean, I think that there are efficiencies in every single agency that can always be identified. The issue with the NYPD, I don't think is that there's disagreement. I think that the issue is with, is how do you do that, right? How do you, and I'll speak for myself. I'm not even going to speak for other members. Like there has been, and let me just clarify, there hasn't been any conversation since the last budget on defund the NYPD. And I think that, and I've said this, publicly and privately to some of you, is that these conversations have to also continue beyond the budget process, right? There has to be adequate planning. this year, because we're still in this year, it was a very difficult year. We were in the middle of a pandemic where we were, for the first time, logging onto Facebook and seeing real people that we knew die right in front of our very eyes, where we were afraid for our lives, where we were really faced with, issues that scared the bejesus out of all of us, right? And so you factor in a budget process, and then George Floyd happens, right? And then you're like, wow, the realities of what's happening in the world are, they're right there. You cannot pretend that they're not. And I think that, it just got so convoluted because it was, there was just so much going on, and we were trying to do the best that we could. And I think that there was also a lot of, I don't know if it was confusion about where we could actually cut, where we couldn't cut. We committed to trying to get to the $1 billion. We got to the $1 billion. We listened to the advocates. We were aligned on a lot of issues. For instance, homeless outreach. No one believes that the NYPD should be responding to homeless outreach calls. Pulling police officers out of schools. Everybody. There's consensus around that. But those services continue to be needed, right? If I'm a parent of a child and I'm leaving my child in a school, I would like there to be some sort of security in the building, not, ensuring the public safety of the building, making sure that people sign in. Those jobs have to be secured. So that money didn't become free money, right? It wasn't free flowing that now we can take and say, well, you know what, let's take this and put this in the senior center. That those resources had to be funded by a different institution in a different way, in a more social service driven way. And I think that once kind of people understood that process, right? And again, remember this, we're talking about weeks, a few weeks. People were not satisfied with that because they felt like it was trickery. Like, you're not really defunding them by $1 billion because you're taking away 500 million for this, but you're giving it to somebody else and not to who I want you to give it to. That's not the way that it works. We have some discretion, but at the end of the day, the mayor is the mayor for a reason, and the mayor will make, his decisions based on what his priorities are. We don't control the entire process, whether, people think that that's the way that it happens. It doesn't. We have a lot of say, and we have a lot of influence, but we don't necessarily, there's a negotiation that has to happen and both parties have to be in agreement. Now, we could have opted to do our own budget, right? But then it would have been litigated, and then what would have happened was that none of our programs would have been funded until the litigation process took, its course. So we opted to negotiate in good faith with the mayor at that time. And so we were able to redistribute or move 500 million and continue to provide essential services, right? Somebody still has to go out and respond to that homeless outreach call. So that's 500,000, and then we moved the other 500, and we were able to repurpose that into different programs through, that were needed, like the SYEP program, for instance. Are we having that conversation, this year? No, I'm assuming that we will at some point, that this is a conversation that'll, that has to be had. But there also has to be an understanding that whatever way we feel about the NYPD, and for me, it's been very difficult because I'm a member of color. I have, been robbed at gunpoint. I have had a son that was almost shot. I have had another son that was stopped and frisked repeatedly, right? So I sympathize with both. My role as a legislator is to look at the whole entire picture. And, in my community, we have certain needs that are not the same as a member that's maybe representing, Midtown or Chelsea. They're not the same. And so in order for us to be responsible legislators and responsible members of the community board, because I consider you guys just as, responsible in this process as we are, right? For really ensuring what the needs of the community are. We need to be able to have these conversations, to sit down and not do that and, wait until there's a full board meeting and put each other on the spot. Like we have to be able to sit down, collectively and say, this is what we want, this is how we intend to get there, and this is the plan. And I think that until we don't really see that citywide, that there will be push and pull, but I don't know how far we're gonna get. I don't know how much, you know, I don't know how much leverage we're gonna have. So I think, Jason, there's gonna be a lot of conversation this year. I'm always available to have that conversation with you guys. If you wanted to set up a forum, I think that it's also important to remember that we as a body are not representative of the entire community, that the rest of the community deserves an opportunity to voice their concerns and their opinions as well. And so I welcome town halls, public forums, and opportunity for everyone to weigh in, because we're making decisions that impact the entirety of this community, and we need to do that responsibly. And if that sometimes comes across as insensitive or something, or maybe someone walks away and says, you know, well, maybe my council member is not really representing my best interest, it's really not at all the case. I love this community with all of my heart, right? I live here, my children live here. I want them to feel safe when they're walking the streets. I want my mother to be able to go to the supermarket and make it back home. It's, you know, is a complicated conversation, but I agree that there's truth and validity in both sides. And I think that, you know, that should play out in the budget process, and it doesn't until it's, you know, towards the tail end, and now it becomes so complicated that we're defunding things that shouldn't have gotten defunded, like sanitation, right? We were so involved in the NYPD conversation that nobody realized that the budget for sanitation was cut so drastically until we went out on, you know, middle of July, and the whole block smelled like a garbage can. And then everybody was wondering, well, what happened? Why are we not getting pickups? Because we have no money. We're down to 2 people picking up in the community, right? Our playgrounds, our parks were a mess. I spent many days, Gail spent many days this summer cleaning up the street, cleaning up, you know, public spaces, because we didn't have the resources to do that, right? Because, you know, these conversations are important enough that we should not leave them until the tail end of a budgetary process to have them.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for that. I will now acknowledge Xavier.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Councilmember Ayala, and everyone involved in the conversation. I guess you've kind of answered what my question was going to be, but I'd like you, beyond having town halls, and once we get to the next stage of the budget, I'd love to hear how we can work more in a more synchronized fashion when we find an alignment, so we can advocate, because often what we're finding across the board as a community board, and we're not alone in this experience, is that there are certain processes and studies that we are shut out of, that we are not included in. And if we were to fulfill our city charter mandate, we need that information. And I'll just, you know, note is it's a recent talking point is the coastal resiliency, the flood with the floodplains after Hurricane Sandy. We discovered after our land use consultant, George James, foiled the document from DCP, that when he received it, the majority was redacted, which would not allow us to act. And this has happened. This is not the first instance. This has happened in the past whenever it's quote unquote in draft form. And I think if we are to truly fulfill our city charter mandate, we have to have the same access to information to inform our advisement. And I guess the twofold question is, how can you assist with that process? And you may have to circle back, because it's a kind of something that's very unique in this part of the process. And 2, once we're able to have that information and then opine and then align, what can we do more when you get into the negotiation process? Like, how can we get into the nitty gritty to really needle your colleagues to say, hey, we're all on the same page. We understand, you know, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and come at the right angle, because the sign of any successful deal is where no one gets 100% of what they want. That's just fact. So twofold question: access to information, and then how can we better work together?
I think that the issue is that where it gets a little bit complicated is that the information is coming from different sources. So when we're talking about Sandy resiliency funding, that's not coming necessarily from the city. So we are privy to some of those conversations, but not necessarily, right? You would be surprised at what I learned when I'm out there talking to constituents that I didn't hear from, the state or the federal government. But you're right. So I would also, suggest inviting maybe your congressional reps, and the state to come in, so that you can have a similar conversation with them, because even though they're not necessarily allocating resources in the same way that the borough president's office and the city council do, they do have access to a significant, a number of dollars that are funding these type of projects, right? I think so. I think, that would be my advice. I just wonder, because I'm thinking about it too, how we could be more helpful in that process, because it just always feels like there's so much going on, at the same time. But I can think, like, we do have access to a lot of information of like what type of public dollars are coming into the community for specific issues. Like if we're talking about the aging population, right? How many senior centers do we have? What is the average contract? What does the contract cover, right? What are those services that, that are still necessary, that are needed? Like we have access to a lot of that information. So maybe, I would invite, some of those community-based organizations to also come in, right, and weigh in on what their perception of what's lacking, right? What would make their work easier. Sorry, I told you that there was going to be one. Stop. Sorry.
No big deal. Just to clarify, would you be able to help us in getting access?
Yeah.
No, don't worry. Would you be able to help us in getting access to that information? That study that was done by DCP?
We can, yes, we can. And we actually, I don't know if you guys get this, but you should. We actually even still get, we get periodic updates. Like, I don't know if Gail's office does.
Xavier is cheating. He's bringing up land use issues at a budget committee meeting.
I'm not cheating. Were you throwing shade? Are you throwing shade?
No, I'm teasing. I
are,
appreciate. I definitely appreciate the
important because
sentiment.
we've been thinking about this, right? And I mentioned the Esplanade earlier, but in the Lower East Side, right? In the Lower East Side, in Carlina, Keith's, and Margaret's district, and Vanessa can speak to this, because I'm sure that she got tortured on this too. They're doing that resiliency plan along the East River Drive, right? And that's really because of flooding that hurt the public housing developments on the Lower East Side. And I know because my brother lives at Lillian Wald Houses, and he was here during Sandy because, they couldn't even walk around in their community because the water was like 3 feet deep. We have similar issues here. So, I mean, to me, it would be more cost effective to be working with the federal government to fund something similar, so that not only are we fixing the Esplanade, but we're also doing it in a way that ensures that future flooding does not continue to become a problem for East Harlem residents, right, in the years to come, especially with climate change. So all of these things are interconnected. It's just, again, you guys are busy, we're busy, and so we have to prioritize a little bit more efficiently, so that, we're communicating in a way that is not, is aligned and really, working towards a common goal.
Maybe we can send pictures of it to Chuck Schumer. That was a joke, but some sense of severity. I agree. It's definitely a multifaceted challenge with acquiring the information and really understanding the funding allocation, because we do want to make sure that our efforts are just and aligned in servicing our constituents. So again, thank you. And again, I was teasing, and thank you, Xavier, for your questions. Carly, I saw that John had a question. As a member of the committee, I think we should let him go, and then you can ask your question, if you don't mind.
Of course not.
Thank you. John, please tell, because I'm all about transparency, and I'd rather us bring up the challenges here, so that way we can start making a working effort. I don't disagree. I might not see it in my lifetime or yours, but hopefully our grandkids.
Yeah, that's true, Jason. Well, the thing is that it's really not a question. It's the thing that as the council member and excuse me, as Ms. Diaz Lopez explained, there's a lot of things going on with a pandemic and economic crisis and all those things. It's really hard to. It's going to be the city council and mayor for the next few years are going to have a big problem with what to fund and where to cut and all that. And it's really a big problem. It's not just really New York City, it's really the entire nation. So the thing is that it's we still have a job to do for district needs and putting in requests for things to be funded. But we're really going to have a hard time because there's only just but so much money to go around in a fiscal crisis. And so the thing is that we may have to be very patient to get some things funded in the future. And really, that's all I really had to say.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much for that, John. I definitely agree with you. It's a long battle ahead, and that's why I agree, as the council member stated, it's not just about advocating and providing advice or getting involved when the checks are getting cut, but being around throughout the entire process and continuing to be a part of the process. And I appreciate the opportunity with all of you to serve. Carly.
Okay, yes, as long as no one else has any questions, I'm happy to ask mine. So Councilwoman Diana Ayala, I just had to say your whole name for some reason, it just came out. Thank you again. And I just wanted to say that what I really appreciated about your presentation is that you identified a very tangible solution or a tangible action that the committee can take in informing our district needs and budget requests, and even responding to the fiscal year 2022 preliminary budget. You mentioned how we can be more specific with community, be more specific about where we want that funding to go. You mentioned DYCD and how there are a lot of organizations that are, lacking funding. And I think that that's a great idea, and I appreciate the suggestion. And you kind of touched upon this earlier about just before about how maybe your office can, help out with that. We do have some organizations come present to us about, they'll ask for a letter of support, support for funding, or specifically last Youth and Education Committee meeting, we had a Head Start program, the bilingual Head Start program. Let us know that DOE was cutting their programming by 75%. And I feel I would love more of that, for more organizations to come and present what their needs are. I haven't been working at the board for very long, but being the staff liaison to this committee and to other committees for the last 2 budget processes, that's one of the first times that doesn't happen often, where an organization will come and present their needs. And I think that there's certainly room for improvement with our relationships to some organizations. Not that there's anything wrong with it, it's just we haven't made that connection yet. So if you touched on this earlier, I think that would really help us to, make connections with different organizations in our district. But also, if you happen to know of any that are, and I don't know if this is like a conflict or anything, but like if you happen to know of any that, if you can point us in the direction of those that are asking for funding, and we can bring them in and just hear them out and see if we can advocate for them. I see Vanessa has her hand raised too. I think that would be a really helpful start.
Yeah, I think that the issue is, right, that they're coming to you at a moment of desperation, right, when they're like already in trouble. And I think that if we were able to kind of turn it around a little bit, and when I worked at Carver Houses for many years, when it was Casita Maria Senior Center, it's now either IPRE, Carver Senior Center, and I didn't know what the hell the community board was. I didn't know what the community board was, and I would get
You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, someone called me. Every month I will get a calendar invite and I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know that it was intended for me, right? There wasn't that relationship between the institution and the community board. So I think that, you know, maybe starting that, or maybe by committee, whatever committees, like, you know, assigned to, you know, whatever community-based organization, start to develop, you know, a comprehensive, you know, spreadsheet of who's who and what's what, and start to really, you know, have those conversations with them so that they're comfortable enough, and maybe suggest that they also submit to you, right, to each committee, a summary, a brief summary of what their needs are, right, where they feel that you could help be a better advocate to them, because that way, you know, I mean, I'm about working smarter, not harder. And I, you know, I think that's it's a good way to start. But I'm happy to share all of, you know, our resources and our contacts, because I think that they would welcome this. I just think that it's just, you know, like the rest of us, we're so busy hustling and working, and you're working with, you know, with children, and you're working with the elderly, and you're working with families that are, you know, facing food insecurity, and you're really dealing with those really difficult day-to-day issues. You don't have time to think about the community board, right, until something happens to you that knocks you up, the wind out of you, and then you're like, oh my God, and somebody says, well, have you called your local council member? Have you called the borough president? Have you called? And then you remember that they exist, right? Because a lot of people don't even know that who we are. Like, they'll come into our office and they're like, oh, we know that we can go there for help, but we don't know who the heck, what this office is. Like, who are you people, right? It's really about re-educating the community and becoming so familiar that they instinctively turn to us for, you know, for help and for information, and consider us a part of their family.
Thank you. And Vanessa has something she wants to say
I
too.
couldn't find the hand feature, so it just, you know, it's I used to work in the Lower East Side for 7 years. I was a chief of staff, and I was always, it surprises me that you have a community board where people don't go to you, because this community boards, like, they're flooded by people. And it tells you, if you look at the demographics of who the people are who are there, right, then it will tell you a little bit more about why people aren't coming to you. So, you know, I've always thought that there should be something in the, at least in the city, in the public education system, where kids at least high school are learning what a community board is, who the representatives are, all of those sorts of things. I'm assuming that was done in the past and it's not done anymore. So does the community board want to take on some of that with the borough president's office? You know, do we want to do some, it seems like we need to do a lot of providing information to people that is not readily available, and or not in the right language, or not in the right place, or all of these different things. So we can certainly let you know when people come to us, but I would think that you want to know who your nonprofits are and reach out to them directly. I know you're volunteers, so to the extent that we can be of support in that, I want you to know that in our applications, we do put which is your community board, and people have to pick who the community board is. And we talk about community boards when we engage with other people. But what I don't want to take much more of your time. It is by design that people don't know what a budget is. It is by design that people don't know who the elected officials are. The systems, including the way that the city budget functions, it is not organized in a way that will allow for real discourse to happen with those who need it the most, more than likely. I don't know how we solve that. Certainly there is ways of solving it. We can't solve it by tomorrow, but I do think it's important to say it in this forum that is, you know, even being able to get the money that you need once you're being allocated funding, it's you know, it can take you 5 years. And if you don't have a legal person to help you offset everything that you need to offset with the different city agencies, it's highly complicated. And while it was created to support and make sure that people are not stealing money and, you know, the city's not going to go bankrupt, ultimately what it does is that communities, like the demographics of Community Board 11, get impacted and they don't know how to navigate those systems. So the only thing I could say is education, 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 but with an action project that will actually be practical in that process. And that, you know, the city budget is going to be negotiated now. So what are some of the things that you guys may want to take on, where you can write resolutions, invite community-based organizations that may want to organize press conferences, visiting the Manhattan delegation, and Councilwoman, don't kill me, knocking at the door of the council people, you know, and all of that sort of thing. That's a part of the process that other community boards and other council districts don't even question whether they're going to do it. They have them in speed dial. Senator so-and-so, Congressman so-and-so, Congresswoman so-and-so. And so, you know, it's time for all of us to, you know, it's time for me to impart whatever knowledge I have, which is not that much, but I'll give it, and whatever connections I have, so that people can benefit from that, irrespectively of who the council person is, of who the elected official is, because we need to learn it in the little time that we have between kids and working and this and that. So just want to say I am available, and that I want to make sure that you as a board know that I understand that these systems are not created equally.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you, Vanessa. I echo both statements and sentiments when it comes to our advocacy efforts and finding more creative ways to collaborate cohesively, so we can push forward in dealing with the despair with our district. I mean, it's real. Everybody understands that. I love the echo sentiment about what this committee has been saying for 4 years since it got created, right? We need to have relationships within our district in order to build bridges outside of our district. And it starts with those community-based organizations, both private and public. So I challenge our committee liaisons with your committee chairs who are well aware of our practice to get that engagement and to get those CBOs involved, so that way we could figure out more creative ways to hold meetings and forums in this fashion where we provide education. Now we got homework. I know I've been writing a lot of things down. I got a lot of homework. Thank you, Vanessa and Diana, Councilmember Diana, for all the homework, because we're gonna have a lot of work for 2021, and I would love for us to start thinking about that. I want
to say really quickly, if you are interested, like, after Christmas, because you know, I have this week and then I'm trying to take the last 2 weeks, I'm exhausted, but after in the new year, if you would like to come in and do, you know, if you and Carly, you want to come in and kind of go down a list of, like, you know, city agencies and what, you know, we can extract from us what we have, then that you can use that as a guiding principle, right? You can start from there, but at least you're not starting from zero. You're at least, you know, you're coming from a place of where you already know how much money is coming into the district for what our perspective is, and then you can align that with whatever the community-based groups, you know, share with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think it'll help a lot. It'll help.
Definitely will. That's been a lot of the conversation. What is and where is the funding? So I think that collaborative effort would be in the interest of the membership, the board, and our constituents, honestly. Like Vanessa kept stating, I mean, the more that we're informed, obviously, the more we can apply, right? If we're not aware of the opportunity, how do we advocate for it?
I would say even one better, maybe just not even just you and Carly, but if you would like to schedule different meetings or one, you know, day or whatever, or half a day with the chairs of each committee, because a lot of times we have the information, but we don't, like, you know, we intend to have it trickle down to the rest of the team, and, you know, it stays somewhere, and you want to make sure that everybody kind of, you know, everybody has access to that so that they know how to advocate for themselves, so that you're not, you know, not micromanaging that whole process but they're feeding into one.
Absolutely. I definitely, I mean, we have our executive next Thursday. So again, in my response of this outstanding session that we had for the last hour, I'm definitely going to make some acts of our board and our leadership to ensure that we're practicing what we're preaching, right? I, as you know, and other members of the community know, I'm all about action and doing the work. So I know I'm there, I'll be there. And I'll make sure that I'll start working to coordinate with the staff and our leadership. And we have our vice chair of the board on our committee. So, he could definitely make a commitment any second now.
Any second. You
There he
questioning my
is.
commitment.
There he is.
Do you see what's in the background? The movie poster, Dial M for murder. Oh. All right, I had to keep it a little real. It's been
Yes.
it's been a haul. We have to have a little bit of humor. Councilmember Ayala, thank you. Vanessa, Matthew raves about you, raves. So whether you know it or not, our little secret.
That's
so
really nice. Thank you.
yeah, so I think we're, Diana, if I could be so forward, yes, we want to get our that information. This committee is like in very many ways a kind of like when we first founded it and I chaired it and Jason was my vice chair, like I looked at it as a ways and means type of committee, and we need that information, all of that, so we can actually make decisions, and that would be absolutely crucial. And when you're meeting with Jason and Carly, if there are certain people that there's a relevant issue that comes up, you want to pull them in, at least get the invite. We'll do the chasing. We're more than pleased to chase people. Jason and I are both doers. We get the work done. So I don't want to take any more time. Thank you very much. If you can make sure that presentation, we have that, because then I think we'll ping that across to all the committees, all of our members here on this committee. Thank you for your questions, and very productive, educational, and expansion upon our training series. So thank you, and just keep us looped in. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Vanessa, and all the committee members. Brilliant.
Thank you, Xavier. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any other hands raised or comments from the public or private, our membership. So I will close this portion of the meeting. If you would like to have any closing sentiments, Vanessa or Councilmember Ayala, you're more than welcome to. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry, somebody keeps calling me. No, I don't. I mean, I just want to say thank you for inviting us. I think that this is a great start, and I hope you found it, informative. But take me up on my offer. I'm happy to, to help facilitate the conversation and give you the information that you need to kind of start some sort of infrastructure that will help you build on.
Thank you so much. Okay, Carly, we could move it right along if you don't mind. Old business, as those of you know, our submission is done in October. As discussed in November, we talked about lessons learned and as it relates to the previous fiscal cycle, and more importantly, to try to be proactive for this fiscal cycle. I know the holiday cheers in, we all get sluggish the next 2 months, but I do, and if not, probably all the committee meetings are already over by today. I will say, start again, thumbing through, seeing what's practical, dealing with your committee. And that was that concept of refinement, right? That we were talking about, which was building this community board plan or manual. I'm not the best with the technical terms. I'm going to look for a lot of you other members to assist me in that process, as I constantly state. I know Carly is golden in helping and assisting with presentations and writing policy. So I would like for us to create that manual and really start looking at our draft submission and trying to be like I said, a lot of our requests were resubmitted. So if you look at the last year's responses, I take that and multiply it by a -1 given our current mindset with the environment and COVID and I mean, let's be realistic, the challenges with the funding initiative. So what does that mean? I look at a request like I can't think of one off the top of my head. There's so many beautiful ones, but I always think about the rat infestation request. And I say, okay, we constantly put it on, but again, yes, we know we have a rat problem. Who's going to take care of cleaning up and dealing with getting rid of the rats? And I think, I can't speak for anybody else, but I do recall certain parts in our charter that says that it's up to us to do that advocacy and that research. So I will look at each liaison in January to probably provide a summary that prioritizes the request that was submitted by the committees in collaboration with your chairs. So again, it assists in some of the efforts of what you heard tonight, and more importantly, our projection methods with how we advocate in the future for future cycles. So that's pretty much the old business. We're already tackling a lot of it. As you've seen today, we talked about this in November, and we were blessed to have 2 local officials show up at our committee meeting. And again, thank you, Carly, for those efforts. And we're gonna try to push for more of these presentations that was brought up today as far as it relates to the state and federal officials to hopefully understand their process and how our performance will secure our claims and our requests. So I don't have anything else for old business. I don't know if anybody else wants to bring anything up. I don't see any hands. We can move right along to new business. New business, there's pretty much none until we get the receipt of the site of our submission so we can start tailoring, but I will talk more about homework. You heard a lot today, right? I'm gonna be a little, those of you who know now the electeds are off, I'll be a little bit more frank. There's bureaucracy, there's red tape. It's up to us to do the work to advocate and to understand the submissions that we put in for our district. I applaud a lot of you for getting a lot of the brunt work done with the administrative efforts. I definitely now want us to start focusing on some of these concerns that are brought up by our committees and start doing the research to figure out ways to properly advocate. You all have my number. You have the email address, and I am more than willing to find different ways for us to collaborate together to figure out how to solve that. So it's not as much as a business item as I do want you to start planning for next year. And also, I would like, since it's the end of the year, for us to overwrite a reflection, if practical. Your interpretation doesn't have to be submitted formally, but something that can reflect on this fiscal cycle and how we submitted and how we could better plan to project for the next cycle. Those of you who are part of some of the other committees, they talk about mission statements and goals. It's the same concept. It's probably just a little bit more technical. So forgive my presentation. So I don't have any other new business. Does anybody else have anything that they think we should be focused on? The items that are, everything that was brought up in the chat, all presentations will be consolidated in the meeting minutes. Those of you who've been on the board a while, I write books. So when I do our minutes, we will have everything that we've discussed, not only for this month, but last month, because I didn't do well with that. So next year you will be writing minutes. You're being told today. Each member, I'm not doing a hat out of the bag. You're getting picked. You'll do it this month. The next member, I'll figure out how I do it. Everybody will have a shot at it, and we'll figure out ways. Yes, Carly. Please bring your reflections to the next committee meeting. I will be reaching out to each of you before the break, before Christmas. Just so we can have a conversation and check-in. So then that way, if like I said, it doesn't have to be formal, but I would love for us to express them. So then that way we can, you bring something to the table as well. I'm not I'm learning this process as much as you are. So the more we could work and figure it out together, the better. Anybody else, questions, concerns for our new business? I promise it'll be specified on our minutes.
Question.
Yes.
So what is it that you want us to start doing minutes after January? You're gonna choose this randomly?
Yeah, so
that
if there's, well, we got 6 members right now. Roughly, I'd say each member do, I mean, we only meet 10 months, so you all might do it once. And if you're absent, I need not tell you I'm still responsible as the chair. But yeah, I would love for us to put forth some of that effort, you know.
Okay,
So you're
and then
engaging.
next meeting, you want us to make sure that we come back with any reflections from this meeting. And you also want us to make sure that we are speaking to our chairs in regards to what initiatives they want to push forward, correct?
Please do, because you
Okay.
will all meet before we meet in January. Every committee here will have met before this committee is met. So, and again, let's continue the conversation. As you know, my number's available. You have concerns. If your chair is flabbergasted at the thought, because some of them act like they see deers with headlights, that they never heard this collaborative effort before, you know, I don't mind voicing my opinion. So I have no problem in telling them or communicating our efforts with them via phone. I will take the initiative and thank you, Stephanie, for kind of emphasizing that. I'll bring it up at executive next committee and at our executive in December and what our efforts are. So, but a lot of you are dealing with great chairs. They're not as aggressive as our previous chairs, I promise you. I'm probably the last of the Mohicans.
Definitely are one of the last aggressive ones.
Passive aggressive, my son says. But anybody else, any questions, concerns? Okay. Next. Announcements. The full board will meet Tuesday, December 15th at 6:30. That is next Tuesday. I'll be at the full board. If you have any questions or comments, anybody have any announcements? Again, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and I appreciate your time.